They were usually celibate, lived a life of mendicancy, and acquired their status by voluntary renunciation rather than by birth. The samanas roamed the Indian countryside, sometimes in company, sometimes as solitaries, preaching their doctrines to the populace, debating with other ascetics, engaging in their spiritual practices, which often involved severe austerities. See Sutta 51, Section 8. Some teachers in the samana camp taught entirely on the basis of reasoning and speculation, while others taught on the basis of their experiences in meditation. The Buddha placed himself among the latter as one who teaches a dhamma that he has directly known for himself. Sutta 100, Section 7. The Buddha's encounters with Brahmins were usually friendly, their conversations marked by courtesy and mutual regard. Several suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya concern the Brahmins' claim to superiority over those in other social classes. In the Buddha's age, the caste system was only beginning to take shape in northeast India, and had not yet spawned the countless subdivisions and rigid regulations that were to manacle Indian society through the centuries. Society was divided into four broad social classes: the Brahmins, who performed the priestly functions; the Khattiyas, the nobles, warriors, and administrators; the Vaisas, the merchants and agriculturalists; and the Sudras, the menials and serfs. From the Pali Suttas, it appears that the Brahmins, while vested with authority in religious matters, had not yet risen to the position of unchallengeable hegemony they were to gain after the promulgation of the laws of Manu. They had, however, already embarked on their drive for domination, and did so by propagating the thesis that Brahmins are the highest caste, the fairest caste, the divinely blessed offspring of Brahma, who are alone capable of purification. Anxiety that this claim of the Brahmins might actually be true seems to have spread among the royalty, who must have been fearful of the threat it posed to their own power. See Suttas 84, Section 4, and 90, Sections 9 and 10. Contrary to certain popular notions, the Buddha did not explicitly repudiate the class divisions of Indian society, or appeal for the abolition of this social system. Within the Sangha, however, all caste distinctions were abrogated from the moment of ordination. Thus people from any of the four castes who went forth under the Buddha renounced their class titles and prerogatives, and instead became known simply as disciples of the Sakyan Sun. Whenever the Buddha or his disciples were confronted by the Brahmins' claim to superiority, they argued vigorously against them, maintaining that all such claims were groundless. Purification, they contended, was the result of conduct, not of birth, and was thus accessible to those of all four castes. Suttas 40, Section 13 and 14, Sutta 84, Sutta 90, Section 12, and Sutta 93. The Buddha even stripped the term Brahmin of its hereditary accretions, and hearkening back to its original connotation of holy man, he defined the true Brahmin as the Arahant, Sutta 98. Those among the Brahmins who were not yet hampered by class prejudice responded appreciatively to the Buddha's teaching. Some of the most eminent Brahmins of the time, in whom there still burned the ancient Vedic yearning for light, knowledge, and truth, recognized in the Buddha the all-enlightened one for whom they longed and declared themselves his disciples. See especially Sutta 91, Section 34. Several even renounced their class privileges, and with their retinues entered the Sangha. Suttas 7, Section 22, and 92, Section 15 to 24. The Samanas were a much more diversified group, which, lacking a common scriptural authority, promulgated a plethora of philosophical doctrines, ranging from the diabolical to the super-divine. The Pali Canon frequently mentions 6 teachers in particular as contemporaries of the Buddha, and as they are each described as the head of an order, regarded by many as a saint, Sutta 77, Section 5, they must have been quite influential at the time. The Majjhima Nikāya mentions both the set of 6 and separately states their individual doctrines. It does not, however, correlate the names with the doctrines. The connections between the names and doctrines are made in the Samanya Pala Sutta of the Digha Nikāya. Purana Kassapa, who is always mentioned first in the list, taught a doctrine of inaction that denied the validity of moral distinctions. Suttas 60, Section 13, and 76, Section 10. Makali Gosala was the leader of a sect known as the Ajivakas, which survived in India down to the medieval period. He taught a doctrine of fatalism that denied causality, and claimed that the entire cosmic process is rigidly controlled by a principle called fate or destiny, niyati. Beings have no volitional control over their actions, but move helplessly, caught in the grip of fate. Suttas 60, Section 21, and 76, Section 13. Ajita Kesakambalin was a moral nihilist who propounded a materialist philosophy that rejected the existence of an afterlife and karmic retribution. Suttas 60, section 5, and 76, section 7. His doctrine is always cited by the Buddha as the paradigmatic instance of wrong view among the unwholesome courses of action. Pakuda Kachayana advocated an atomism on the basis of which he repudiated the basic tenets of morality. Sutta 76, section 16. Sanjaya Belatiputta, a skeptic, refused to take a stand on the crucial moral and philosophical issues of the day, probably claiming that such knowledge was beyond our capacity for verification. Sutta 76, section 30. The sixth teacher, the Niganta Nataputta, is identified with Mahavira, the historical progenitor of Jainism. He taught that there exists a plurality of monadic souls entrapped in matter by the bonds of past karma, and that the soul is to be liberated by exhausting its karmic bonds through the practice of severe self-mortification. Whereas the Pali Suttas are generally cordial but critical towards the Brahmins, they are trenchant in their rejection of the rival doctrines of the Samanas. In one sutta, Sutta 60, the Buddha contends that the firm adoption of any of the first three doctrines, and by implication the fourth, entails a chain of unwholesome states generating evil karma strong enough to bring a descent into the lower realms. Similarly, the Venerable Ananda describes these views as four negations of the holy life in Sutta 76. The skepticism of Sanjaya, while not regarded as so pernicious, is taken as an indication of its proponent's dullness and confusion. It is described as eel-wriggling because of its evasiveness and classified among the types of holy life that are without consolation. Sutta 76, section 30 and 31. The Jain doctrine, though sharing certain similarities with the Buddha's teaching, was held to be sufficiently mistaken in basic assumptions as to call for refutation, which the Buddha undertook on several occasions. Suttas 14, 56, and 101. The repudiation of these erroneous views was seen from the Buddhist perspective to be a necessary measure not only to sound a clear warning against tenets that were spiritually detrimental, but also to cut away the obstacles against the acceptance of right view, which, as the forerunner of the Buddha's path, Sutta 117, section 4, was a prerequisite to progress along the road to final deliverance. Technical notes. There remain to be discussed only a few technical points concerning this translation. First, a general problem inevitably facing any translator from the Pali Canon. Then certain changes that have been made in Venerable Nyanamoli's renderings of important doctrinal terms. The repetitions. Readers of Pali Suttas, particularly in the original language, will immediately be struck by the frequency and length of the repetitive passages. The repetitions, if examined, will be found to be of different kinds, and thus probably stem from different sources. We may consider three main types. First, there are the narrative repetitions within a single sutta as well as the repetition of statements in ordinary conversation. These doubtlessly originate from the method of oral transmission by which the suttas were preserved for the first 4 centuries of their existence, such repetitions serving as a useful mnemonic device to ensure that details would not be lost. In this translation, these repetitions have usually been bridged over, and occasionally the liberty was taken of contracting them. A second type of repetition stems from the use of stock formulas to describe fixed set of doctrinal categories or aspects of the training. A common example of this is the formulas for the 4 jhanas and the 3 true knowledges. These formulas were almost certainly part of the Buddha's repertory of instructions, employed by him in the countless discourses he gave during the 45 years' ministry in order to preserve the unity and consistency of his teaching. Here, the shorter, stereotyped formulas have generally been allowed to stand, except when they play a subordinate role to a larger theme, in which case only the main clauses have been retained. An example is the treatment of the jhana formula at Sutta 53, section 18. The longer formulas that appear very often have been abridged, with references usually given to the passages where they appear in full. Examples are the treatment of the first 2 true knowledges at Sutta 27, sections 23 to 24, and of the gradual training at Sutta 38, sections 31 to 38. A third type of repetition stems from the Buddha's application of an identical method of exposition to a series of doctrinal terms belonging to a fixed set. Examples are the formula for insight that is attached to each of the exercises in the Satipatthana Sutta, Sutta 10, section 5, and the exposition on the 3 characteristics applied to each of the 5 aggregates, Sutta 22, section 26. These repetitions, contrary to modernistic suppositions, were very likely integral to the Buddha's own pedagogical method, and served to drive home the points he wanted to convey. We can well imagine that such repetitions, delivered by a fully enlightened teacher to those earnestly striving for awakening, must have sunk down deep into the minds of those who heard them, and in many cases triggered off a glimpse of the truth. In the translation, this type of repetition has usually been handled by repeating the method of exposition only for the first and last terms in the set, as is often done in the Pali editions of the texts, except when the method of exposition is especially long, as at Sutta 118, sections 37 to 39, in which case it is shown in full only for the first term, and in much abbreviated form for the rest. Those who read the suttas as an exercise in contemplation, and not merely for information, may try mentally filling in the entire sequence and exploring its range of implications. Dhamma. In his later translations, Venerable Nyanamoli appears to have set himself two goals: to render virtually every Pali word into English. Arahant and Bodhisattva are rare exceptions, and to do so in obedience to a very rigorous standard of consistency. In effect, the principle that guided his work was one Pali word, one corresponding English word. This principle he also applied to his treatment of the multiplex word dhamma, of which he wrote elsewhere that the need for unity in the rendering is so great as to be almost desperate. He chose as his root rendering the word idea, which he attempted to deploy for the Pali word in all its diverse occurrences. Even when dhamma is used in the suttas to signify the Buddha's teaching, he still remained faithful to his choice by translating it the true idea. Needless to say, this experiment was not successful. Recognizing this, Venerable Kantipalo, in his edition of the 90 Suttas, opted instead to retain the Pali word in most of its occurrences. This decision, however, seems to have been unnecessary when the relinquishment of the demand for strict consistency allows for smooth and reliable translation without loss of meaning. While the many different uses of the Pali word dhamma may originally have had some underlying connection of meaning, by the time of the Pali Canon, such connection had already receded so far into the background as to be virtually irrelevant to the understanding of the texts. The commentaries ascribe at least 10 different contextual meanings to the word, as it occurs in the canon, and they do not try to read any philosophical significance into this variability of application. The goal of lucid translation therefore seems to require that the word be rendered differently according to its context, which generally makes the intended meaning clear. In revising Venerable Nyanamoli's translation, I have retained the Pali word dhamma only when it refers to the Buddha's teaching, or in several cases to a rival teaching with which the Buddha's is contrasted, as at Sutta 11, section 13, and Sutta 104, section 2. In its other uses, the context has been allowed to decide the rendering. Thus, when dhamma occurs in the plural as a general ontological reference term, it has been rendered things, as at Sutta 1, section 2, and Sutta 2, section 5. When it acquires a more technical nuance, in the sense either of the phenomena of existence or of mental constituents, it has been rendered states, as at Sutta 64, section 9, and Sutta 111, section 4. This term, however, must be divested of its overtone of staticity, dhammas being events within a dynamic process, and it must also not be taken to refer to some persisting entity that undergoes the states, entities themselves being nothing but connected series of dhammas. The last two meanings of dhamma are not always separable in the texts, and sometimes naturalness of English diction had to be used as the factor for deciding which should be selected. As the fourth foundation of mindfulness, and as the sixth external sense base, ayatana, dhamma has been rendered mind objects. Even here, ideas is too narrow. In still other contexts, it has been rendered as qualities, Suttas 15, section 3, and 48, section 6, and teachings, Suttas 46, section 2, and 47, section 3. When used as a suffix, it acquires the idiomatic sense of to be subject to. Sankhara. Although this word, as used in the suttas, has different specific references in different contexts, unlike dhamma, it retains enough unity of meaning to permit, with rare exceptions, a uniform rendering. The problem, however, is to decide which of the many proposed renderings is the most adequate, or, if none are found fitting, to coin a new one that is. The root idea suggested by the word sankhara is making together. The Pali commentators explain that the word allows for both an active and a passive sense. Thus, the sankharas are either factors or forces that function together in producing an effect, or they are the things that are produced by a combination of cooperating factors. In his translation of the Visuddhimagga, Venerable Nyanamoli had rendered sankharas as formations, a rendering favoured by many other translators. In his later translation scheme, he had experimented with rendering it as determinations, and had attempted to incorporate that new choice into his manuscript of the Majjhima. In editing the manuscript, Venerable Kantipalo chose to return to the translator's earlier and better-known formations, and in this edition I have followed suit. Though this word has the disadvantage of accentuating the passive aspect of sankharas, it avoids the problems into which determinations runs, and seems colourless enough to take on the meaning determined by the context. The word sankhara occurs in 4 major contexts in the Pali Suttas. 1. As the second factor in the formula of dependent origination, it is used to mean volitional actions, suggesting their active role of generating results in the process of rebirth. 2. As the fourth of the 5 aggregates, the sankharas comprise all the mental factors not included in the 3 other mental aggregates. This group is probably assigned the name Sankhara Kanda after its chief member, volition, Chetana, which is responsible for forming all the other aggregates. 3. Sankhara is also used in a very comprehensive sense to signify everything produced by conditions. In this sense, it comprises all 5 aggregates, as at Sutta 35, section 4, and 115, section 12. Here the word bears the passive sense, being explained by the commentators as Sankhata Sankhara, formations consisting in the conditioned. This usage comes close in meaning to the ontological use of dhamma, except that the latter is wider in range, since it includes the unconditioned element nibbana and concepts paññāti, both of which are excluded from sankhara. 4. In still another context, the word sankhara is used in relation to kaya, vaci, and citta, body, speech, and mind, to mean the bodily formation, which is in and out breathing, the verbal formation, which is applied thought and sustained thought, and the mental formation, which is perception and feeling. The first and third are things that are dependent respectively upon the body and the mind, the second the things that activate speech. This triad is discussed at Sutta 44, sections 13 to 15. Sankhara is also employed outside these major contexts, and in one such case, Venerable Ñāṇamoli's sense of determination has been retained. This is where it occurs in the compound Padana Sankhara, which has been rendered determined striving, as at Sutta 16, section 26. The rare and involved idiom Sankharang Padati has similarly been rendered he strives with determination, Sutta 101, section 23. In another case, Sutta 120, following the commentarial gloss, Sankhara is rendered aspiration. Nama-rupa. Venerable Ñāṇamoli had translated this compound literally as name and form. In this edition, the compound has been changed back to the rendering used in his translation of the Visuddhimagga, mentality-materiality, though with regret that this cumbersome Latinet expression lacks the concision and punch of name and form. The word nama originally meant name, but in the Pali Suttas, it is used in this compound as a collective term for the mental factors associated with consciousness, as will be seen in the definition at Sutta 9, section 54. The commentaries explain nama here as deriving from the word namati, to bend, and as being applied to the mental factors because they bend towards the object in the act of cognizing it. Rupa is used in 2 major contexts in the suttas, as the first of the 5 aggregates and as the specific object of eye consciousness. The former is a broader category that includes the latter as one among many other species of rupa. Venerable Ñāṇamoli, aiming at consistency in his manuscript translation, had used form for rupa as visible object in preference to the visible datum used in his earlier translation scheme. But when rupa is used to signify the first of the 5 aggregates, it has been changed to material form. This rendering should indicate more precisely the meaning of rupa in that context, while preserving the connection with rupa as visible object. Occasionally in the texts, the word seems to straddle both meanings without allowing an exclusive delimitation, as in the context of certain meditative attainments, such as the first 2 liberations, Sutta 77, section 22. Brahma. The word Brahma provided Venerable Ñāṇamoli with another challenge to his endeavour to achieve complete consistency. The word itself, going back to the Vedic period, originally meant holy power, the sacred power that sustains the cosmos, and that was contacted through the prayers and rituals of the Vedas. Though the word retained its significance of holy or sacred, by the Buddha's time it had undergone 2 distinct lines of development. One culminated in the conception of Brahman, Nuta, as an impersonal absolute reality, hidden behind and manifesting itself through the changing phenomena of the world. This conception is the keynote of the Upanishads, but the word Brahma never appears in this sense in the Pali Canon. The other line of development culminated in the conception of Brahma, masculine singular, as an eternal personal God who creates and regulates the world. This conception was held by the Brahmins as depicted in the Pali Suttas. The Buddhists themselves asserted that Brahma was not a single creator god, but a collective name for several classes of high deities, whose chiefs, forgetting that they are still transient beings in the grip of karma, were prone to imagine themselves to be the omnipotent everlasting creator. See Sutta 49.